Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This is Larry again, and we're going to do Contact Report 29. This contact report was translated by a DeepL translator. Corrections and improvements made by Joseph Darman and Catherine Mossman. And the contact person was Semjase. Okay, Contact Report 29. This is Monday, 7 July, 1975 at 10:37 in the morning. Billy, it took you a long time this time before you came to me when I called. Was it something special? Semjase, sure, but I had informed you about that. Billy, I understand, but if you have enough time, I would like to ask you several questions today, because a lot has accumulated in the meantime. Semjase, I have plenty of time for today. Billy, very good. As a first question, I would like to know what the facts are regarding the engine damage to the Viet family, because they explained to me that it was a life-threatening thing. I do not understand how you can do such crazy things and play with people's lives. Semjase, that is not quite the case, and I explained to you earlier that the facts were a little different than you think, because on the one hand, we had to find a way to make the undertaking work for the right crowds and give you the time you needed for the talks. On the other hand, we had to try to prevent an accident that would inevitably have occurred if we had not acted in this manner. Unfortunately, we only noticed this when we could only prevent the evil consequences by immediate manipulation. With our devices and equipment, we noticed heavy damage in the engine of the vehicle when we tried to switch off the electrical equipment, whereby we would have put the vehicle out of operation for 3 days. The damage of the engine was so dangerous for the occupants of the vehicle that they would have had to drive only 1.32 kilometers before the accident would have happened. The consequences would certainly have been absolutely fatal for the occupants, which is why we accelerated the destruction process of the engine and influenced further events. This prevented the impending disaster and saved the lives of the occupants. The fact that everything was destroyed was not our fault, because this was due to the actual damage of the engine. We only triggered the last effect of the already existing damage, whereby we were able to prevent the worst. Billy, you know the engine was completely destroyed? Semjase, sure, it has become unstable in its form, or unusable in its form. Billy, aha, it reassures me immensely that you are not to blame for the mess, because the repair cost about 3,000 DM, I'm guessing that's Dutch marks, as I was told. According to your statement, I feel that the whole thing is more than saving my life. Semjase, certainly, but what is your next question? She's changing the subject. Billy, you are in a hurry. Have you suddenly become so curious? Mr. and Mrs. Viet have asked me what you and others think of their work. Semjase, it has been and still is associated with a great deal of effort from the very beginning. They have endured many attacks and intrigues, and in spite of many odds, they have pushed their valued efforts very far forward and thus achieved good results. From our point of view, I can say that we all value and support their work and efforts very highly. They deserve a great deal of praise. Unfortunately, however, there are some negative factors to be mentioned, namely their belief in untruths of religious direction and letting certain deceptive elements be led astray. In these things, they should work out the most precise clarification and insight. Billy, I wanted to come to this questioning myself, Semjase, namely regarding certain fraudulent elements. The Viet family is convinced that the folks you mentioned are not guilty of fraud. What do you say to that? Semjase, We have recorded your hour-long conversations, and I am very well informed about everything. But I also told you before that you will have a very difficult position. This has come true, as you yourself know. This difficult state will continue to apply to you, for your interlocutors may be quite understanding, generous, and courteous, but they are very much influenced by certain misleading factors which have negative effects on everything. In addition, we have found in various places that certain things are going on against you and that intrigues directed against you are being built up. You have been closely observed and monitored from various sides for some time now, while some evil elements are already trying to bring intrigue to bear against you. In certain circles, those are already working to accuse you of lies and deceit, because the truth itself begins to become harmful to them. Therefore, exercise caution in all respects. Malicious tongues are already accusing you of espionage for foreign powers, while others are already accusing you of insulting deception, through which it is intended to deprive you of the possibility of spreading the truth. These malevolent elements belong, on the one hand, to religious and sectarian circles, and on the other hand, to a still secret organization which wants to suppress and destroy the truth. Certain lines also run in this regard to various secret societies, as well as to authorities and military personnel, and to certain individuals whose malicious work is endangered by you in spreading the truth. Certain elements, however, already work against you according to the same standards because they could be prematurely convicted of deceit by your spreading of truth and by the coming knowledge of your sciences. Billy, you are giving me fantastic hopes, Semjase. Actually, I was expecting things like that. Semjase, you also had to, because you know these factors from earlier times, as I now know, because I could reveal a tiny particle of your secret. Billy, of course, for I am not upset. Your answer regarding certain fraudulent elements does not satisfy me. Please explain this in more detail, because you have practically simply bypassed my question. Semjase, I have already given you information about this on various occasions, but I will do it another time, because the assumptions recorded in the conversations are wrong about the diversity of the truth in the form that our explanations and interpretations would only correspond to a part of the truth and would only lead to the final truth in confrontation with other explanations and interpretations of other life forms coming to you Earth humans. At the present time, we are the most highly developed life forms that travel this Earth from outside your world and are also stationed here. I guess I heard somewhere they had like 3 bases hidden around the world. Although there are other life forms that penetrate your Earth space, fly in, and partly also have their stations here, we correspond to the highest level of evolution of all. The second most developed form of life after us lies little more than 1840 years of total evolution behind us. Of all present extraterrestrial life forms which currently live in the earthly space, we are therefore a little more than 1,840 Earth years ahead in the total evolutionary standing. When we therefore communicate explanations and interpretations, then these correspond to the highest level of knowledge and wisdom and the highest known truth, which must not first lead to truth in a confrontation through any explanations and interpretations of much more deeply developed life forms. What we therefore convey to you is the finally known truth up to and including our spiritual level. This also means that we can only explain the effective truth with regard to the fraudulent elements mentioned earlier, and I, for my part, have to stick with my explanations because they correspond to the truth. So if certain persons doubt my explanations in this regard, they must sooner or later gain the knowledge of the truth of my words. This is especially true of the fraudulent allegations of various fraudsters and charlatans who made false worldwide statements regarding alleged contacts with people on your neighboring planet Venus. She said before, Venus is too hot. Nobody can live there. There is no life forms on Venus. In not too many years, science will prove to you that no human life forms exist on that planet in the form described by certain charlatans and deceivers, neither in spiritual nor material form. So, if my explanations in this regard are also rejected by various Earth humans, this is not of great importance because the earthly scientists themselves will confirm and prove my statements in a few years' time, whereby at the same time the proof is provided that different pseudo-contactees are and were only evil swindlers and charlatans. He's getting down on all these guys talking about flying to Venus and Mars and stuff. For the really interested Earth humans, I would like to try to give some important explanations regarding the planet Venus. In many cases, the earthly solar system is rushed through by comets and wandering planets or wandering stars, for which the following is to be explained. Comets appear in various forms, once as traveling planets and the other as traveling stars, drawn into their circles by the tremendous attractions of other stars and planets. As a result of their high speed, however, they usually rush through and break through the belt of gravitational forces and move away again, whereby they are superficially liquefied and lose matter due to the friction with the planet's solar and stellar forces. This then often follows as a very long tail behind the one rushing through. So, a comet. Due to solar energies, etc., the repelled particles then become visible as a shining tail. On the other hand, the empty space is not empty either, because it is also animated by innumerable particles and other things, which cause the wandering planets or wandering stars to shine through the constant friction with them and their tail. However, besides these comets, there are also the icy and fog-like comet bodies. In general, comets have quite eccentric orbits and circle also like planetary systems around the sun, but in much wider orbits. These system comets generally only develop their impressive long tails in the vicinity of the sun, which can often be many millions of kilometers long. However, really gigantic comets are quite rare, which is why most of the comets are not visible to the naked eye. Only really big and very near Earth comets are seen by Earth humans with the naked eye. The average comet is often no more than a small and very faint spherical cloud without a tail. But exactly this kind of comets are countless. The fog-like comets are the most common, and they have three main characteristics. Because they are surrounded by a foggy coma with or without internal central compression, they have a core and a tail. The forms of the coma, which in parentheses envelope around the nucleus of a comet, can be very different, elliptical or round or warped in any direction. The central compression appears in such a manner that the coma inside becomes lighter and more compact. The core itself forms a strongly luminous zone and embodies the actual comet, which can be between a few hundred meters and many thousands of meters in size, while the total length of the comet tail, together with the comet coma, very often measures up to many hundreds of thousands or even millions of kilometers. Depending on the type of comet and the influences, the tail consists of dust particles or gas forms, or of dust particles and gas forms together. Pure gas tails are much narrower than the particle, meteorite, and dust tails, which only appear in larger comets and are very bright, while the gas tails are not very bright and enormously narrow. The system-bound comets have very long and elongated orbits, which extend very deeply into space. But there's comment here. They're still circling the sun. They're just in a long oblong orbit. These orbits very often lead halfway or even close to the outer soul planets before returning to the sun and the inner soul planets. However, the orbits can also run so far that the path leads far out into the Oort, O-O-R-T, cloud outside all planetary systems, and accordingly the path becomes longer. Due to the long orbits, the comets often need many decades or centuries before they fly back to their home system, while space wanderers, comets that fly out of and into the solar realm in a different manner, have orbiting times of many thousands of years. And like all bodies of the world, comets are also subject to the laws of gravity, so their orbits form accordingly. And it is precisely these different orbits and their expanses that are decisive for certain changes and occurrences in the most diverse planetary and solar systems, even if these occurrences and changes are only very, very rare. I have already talked in a little less detailed manner about these comet factors before, so I must explain a little more now. This is because it is necessary to explain that no human life forms exist on the planet Venus. Millions of years ago, a giant dark star in another space-time configuration destroyed half a planetary system in many light years distance from the earthly system. After the destruction of that distant system, the wanderer rushed out into the vastness of space, entered the space-time structure of the Milky Way of the Dern universe, and set course for Earth. By large and small planets and by the sun, it was forced into a new course, which consequently had to bring it again and again into the Sol system. Known as the Destroyer, it stubbornly followed its new course and over the course of millions of years created a firm path for itself. But this orbit often led the Destroyer uncontrollably to planetary systems or other wandering stars or comets, which were pushed off course by its gigantic size or attracted by its attraction and destroyed or abducted. This also happened only a few thousand years ago when this gigantic Destroyer tore an object into its tow and brought it many millions of kilometers outside of the Earth's range to the earthly planetary system. The Destroyer itself passed very far out of Earth's range, while the object in tow, however, came dangerously close to Earth and caused devastating disasters. The whole solar system got into disorder at that time, and all planets were pushed into new orbits. But the harmony-destroying object was forced into an orbit between Earth and Mercury by the gravity of the large planets and the Sun and was unable to leave. And as the brightest planet of the Sol system, the dragged object orbits the Sun since then and is called Venus by the Earth humans. So Venus was basically abducted from some other solar system and dragged here by the Destroyer comet. And then it got caught in the gravity of the Sun and the Earth and Mercury and became Venus. This event, when Venus was introduced into the terrestrial solar system, took place thousands of years ago. Due to the events of that time, the planet was steered into a very quiet orbit. Thus, it has one of the least eccentric orbits. This is the actual consequence of the very close flyby of the Earth at that time, which also influenced the rotation time of the planet Venus. Due to the gravity of the Earth, the invading Venus was torn around and began to rotate retrograde. And as a consequence of the very short transit time through earthly gravity, the rotation of the intruding planet, the future planet Venus, could not increase again, so that it attained only an extremely slow rotation time and thus has the slowest rotation time of the whole solar system. Thus, a day on Venus lasts 117 earthly days, whereby the rotation time around the 3-degree inclined axis of the poles amounts to 243 Earth days. So, let's see. One day is 117 earthly days, and the rotation around a 3, in other words, the seasons, I'm guessing, 3-degree inclined axis of the poles, is 243 Earth days. Okay. The Earth's gravity robbed Venus of its own rotational energy during its passage thousands of years ago, and a very large frictional heat was generated. This frictional heat is also the source of certain surface changes on the planets, but not in relation to the physical conditions that prevail on Venus today. These physical conditions alone belie all other charlatans and deceivers who claim that human life exists on Venus. This falls completely outside the scope of the natural possibility because the environmental conditions on the surface of Venus and the greenhouse atmosphere are absolutely hostile to human beings of any kind. The surface temperature of Venus, which is still measured at a height of half a kilometer below the surface and at a low volcanic level on the surface, is still 457 to 470 degrees Celsius today, according to your Celsius calculations. So I don't know what that translates to, but I know the cookies I made this morning weren't nowhere near that hot in the oven. So this is also the reason why all the water brought to this hot planet by comets and ice meteors, etc., has evaporated and today forms the very thick cloud layer. This, however, also allowed an atmosphere to form which is so dense that the pressure at the assumed sea level is 334 times greater than the Earth's air pressure. Earth is like 14 point something pounds per square inch. Venus is 334 times greater than the Earth's air pressure. And according to your scientific terms, the atmosphere of Venus is also hostile to any human form, etc., because it consists of about 87% by volume carbon monoxide, although the percentage varies slightly. Oxygen and noble gases, as well as hydrochloric acid and sulfuric dioxides, etc., currently exist in the lower layers at present only to approximate 4%, and also some percent nitrogen as well as carbon dioxide are to be named with approximate 95%. There are very few water vapors at present, and the atmosphere is very different from that of the Earth. The actual pressure of the Venus atmosphere is 107 times greater than the pressure of your Earth atmosphere. And this, too, is a fact that is hostile to human forms of life. This great pressure, which only diminishes very slowly, crushes and destroys human life forms beyond recognition, and even metal forms can succumb to the same fate. For your scientist's orientation, I want to explain here that on Venus, we found earthly apparatuses that were completely crushed and destroyed by the tremendous pressure of the Venus atmosphere before they even reached the surface of the planet. In particular, these were sounding apparatuses of your nation, Russia, which were shot over by the scientists of this country to Venus. These found and destroyed apparatuses looked as if they had been shot with tremendous force against a metal wall. In other words, they splattered. Venus has a magnetic field only in very small masses, and also the layer called the Van Allen belt by you is still very weakly developed. Consequently, the factor called solar wind by you is not shielded very strongly. In addition, the very high temperature which affects this belt must also be taken into account. But the lack of water also has its consequences, as it also feeds the planet's hostility to life. Due to the events of thousands of years ago, the planet, which in earlier times was volcanically bubbling in its entirety, and today mostly only slightly superficially and subsuperficially volcanic, and with partly huge craters, crater families and plateaus, as well as with partly high mountains and crater central mountains, is currently only in the phase of recovery, construction, and production. Slowly, in the course of millions and billions of years, natural living conditions and life forms of the most primitive species can develop, as they are naturally common on all viable worlds that are only just emerging. From this, it can be seen, even for the most foolish, that Venus is a primordial planet in the sense that it is only in the stage of generating life. As far as the planet itself is concerned, it is very flat, especially in the equatorial regions, and the relief structure regions are very far away. In terms of temperature, day and night sides are almost the same, while there are large differences in wind strengths in low and high regions. On the surface itself, there is no wind, and only in higher regions do winds develop. In even higher regions, the winds increase very strongly and reach speeds of 117 meters per second and more. The lowest limit of the cloud layers is 43.17 kilometers, but it can shift again and again due to atmospheric storms and so on. In particular, this is possible in areas where the winds are pressed downwards, reaching the surface and accumulating in the mountains, which look like wrinkles along the other forms, reaching different sizes and heights and partially very different. The climatic and structural conditions are generally the same on the planet Venus, but there are certain differences. However, human or other higher life on this planet is still impossible at the moment if appropriate technical measures, etc., are not taken. In the aforementioned sense, however, as various charlatans and swindlers claim, Venus actually has no life, only in completely different and microscopically smallest thermoforms, etc. This life is present, but no comparisons can be made to other life forms of viable planets. The planet is still very wild, because how could this be any different since then until today? As an example, do not use the Earth moon as Venus's. As an example, do not use the Earth moon as Venus's moon, because if you look at it, you do not have the image of Venus in any manner, because under the dense Venus cloud layer, there is completely different range. There is a completely different image. If we or other life forms go to Venus, which is rich in various minerals and other substances, then this is only possible with special protective suits that protect us from the dangerous influences of the Venus atmosphere and the great pressure, etc. We must also take into account the various forms of poisons and gases that move around the wild planet as deadly swaths. And since the planet is subject to certain differences, we also have to take into account certain places where the temperature rises to 500 degrees Celsius. For example, directly on special areas of the surface, where also the values of carbon dioxide and nitrogen, as well as carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide, helium gas, excuse me, argon gas and neon gas, sulfuric acid and water vapor, etc., shift, whereby also the bar pressure, which is a form of atmospheric pressure measurement, fluctuates from the value 88 up to 107. So 1 bar is the amount of pressure on Earth, which is like 14. So their Venus fluctuates between 88 and 107. However, all these data can always be fluctuating because everything in this regard is subject to constant fluctuations. These are the most basic explanations I have to give regarding the habitability and existence of human or human-like life forms on the planet Venus. If I had to describe other planets of your solar system, then unfortunately I would have to deny the fraudulent statements of certain elements on different planets and replace them with the real truth, because different allegedly inhabited planets of your system do not contain any forms of human life. But especially, I would like to talk again about George Adamski, when she hammers on Adamski, because he made the most tremendous assertions together with Carl Michalek, and because of the excessive number of trick photos, etc., he became more and more audacious and frivolous in the course of the years. Since he saw and recognized that he found great approval in certain circles and that his photos, etc., were not subjected to too much scrutiny and therefore were able to deceive real experts, he dared to make even greater claims, namely that he had flown in extraterrestrial spaceships and had been photographed from ship to ship by extraterrestrial life forms. In this regard, I refer specifically to the book Inside the Spaceships, which you kindly gave me earlier to study. In this book, before page 161, there is a photograph of Adamski allegedly taken from a Venusian reconnaissance ship. Here it is stated that in the picture, Adamski is in the early morning hours of the 25th of April, 1955, on board of a larger spaceship and is standing together with an extraterrestrial human being at a viewing hatch. This picture alone is able to convey to every truth-loving and inquiring human being on Earth the fact that Adamski's statements correspond to a pure fantasy, because through the constantly increasing journeys on Earth and the arising carelessness, he has made a spectacular mistake here, which convicts him of deception. If it is seriously taken into consideration that the size of the viewing hatch excuse me, into which Adamski had glued a picture of his head, converted to a scale true to reality, only amounts to just 15 centimeters. This is a very accurate measure, extremely precise and correct. If this measure is now remeasured into the total width of the ship, the length and width of which can be recalculated in the picture, this would result in a total width and total height of the ship of only 171 centimeters and a total length of 897 centimeters, which would correspond to the measures of reality. Adamski, however, had made models which did not exceed a maximum size of 30 centimeters, but were usually only a few centimeters in size, which he mounted on glass panes in front of the optics of his devices and then photographed. In this way, he obtained very deceptive photos, especially when he worked with telescopes and was able to use the moon as a background. He was only able to take various photographs by lining up several panes of glass with pictures, drawings, and self-illuminating dyes, and then photographing the whole thing. He had a friend who had died in the meantime make a very good model made of metal. He also attached this bell-shaped model to a very strong and pierced glass pane and used it for close-ups, etc., which were able to deceive even experts. Adamski was able to cast a spell over worldwide circles through these enormous machinations. This was made all the easier for him by the corresponding orientation of his being, his Wesson, towards his fellow humans. To a great extent, however, his extraordinarily high ability of suggestion was decisive, enabling him to provoke hallucinations as well in well-known personalities in various forms. For many years, he was able to influence people with such realistic thinking according to his will and fantasies, and to let them have the conviction that they were actually in contact with extraterrestrial intelligences. In addition to Adamski, there are other charlatans and swindlers of the same kind of work, although their dimensions do not reach his. However, several of them play a very important role and continue to promote untruth. Billy, your explanations could probably not be much clearer, and so I assume that these should actually be sufficient for reasonable people. What is not yet clear to me, however, is the distribution of our contact reports. The last contact was only of a thought-based nature, and besides, your leader got involved. Semjase, certainly, for this was necessary one time after various inconsistencies had arisen among you. From my side, I clearly explained to you that Gloria Lee's writing should only be spread under an appropriate guidance or explanation. But this provision was contravened, which is very unhelpful for the whole thing, because in this writing, things are mentioned which do not correspond to the facts. For the unenlightened, it is quite a good paper, but it represents a certain danger factor in the necessary if the necessary explanations are not given. With regard to the contact reports, I also explained to you that they should be disseminated in internal circles as they already are. Only for external circles should they be revised in such a manner that all personal concerns, etc., are removed. Only for external circles should they be revised in such a manner that all personal concerns, etc., are removed. However, if any external circles appear who wish to purchase the unabridged reports, they should not be handed over to them in their entire form. The revised form of the reports, therefore, applies only to such people and to the general public. Billy, that is how we thought it would be, Semjase. Semjase, then there must be some misunderstanding on our part. Billy, it has to be, but we do not talk about it anymore. It has also had its good because through it, I also came into contact with your leader. He's talking about Quetzal, who is basically the commander of all soul system, all their bases and everything here in the soul system. Semjase, sure, but I do not want it to stay like that. We have other such opportunities at a later stage because we have provided for them. But that will only be when we prepare you for the great journey that will take you farther than Earth humans have ever traveled in the last 2,000 years. Billy, you mentioned some of this at the last meeting. You said I could come to your Pleiades once. Semjase, sure, but this will only be a very small part of your great journey because the destination is a few billion light years away from the Earth. Billy, wow, that is fantastic. I just wish I could take pictures then. Unfortunately, the last pictures from the journey to Saturn were almost all kaput. Either they were underexposed or overexposed, or the film was just black. Semjase, that was to be feared, unfortunately, because for such purposes, you would have to have special equipment available. Billy, nevertheless, I will try again on the next trip. If I only manage a few pictures halfway, then I am already satisfied. Semjase, sure, there is nothing wrong with that, but do not rely too much on success. Billy, of course not. Semjase, at our next contact, we will again have to discuss specific issues that we have neglected recently. There is also the possibility that we will pick you up for another special flight in the near future. We also want to see if you can take certain photographs because we have made a special apparatus for this purpose. Billy, what am I supposed to photograph? Semjase, you will see that soon enough. But now my time is up again because I still have various duties to fulfill. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of Contact Report 29. She's basically hammered on George Adamski and basically told you everything you need to know about Venus. So have a good night, and we'll see you on 30. Bye.